So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Australian Earth Laws Alliance Earth Arts series of webinars, which we're delighted to be calling Creative Conversations, Art Inspired by Nature. Earlier this year, we had a wonderful session with Moretta and Renata talking about their work. And if you missed it, James and I will put the web link in for you later. But today, I'm really delighted to invite an inspiring artist and photographer and someone who has helped me build the AELA's Earth Arts program, Marian Drew. But before we hand over to Marian to share some lovely insights with us, I'd like to acknowledge country. And as it's becoming somewhat of a Zoom tradition, if you would like to pop into the Zoom where you are and whose country you're on, it's lovely to see where people are from. I'd like to acknowledge that I now live, work and play in the remarkable lands of the Jinnaburra and Turrbal peoples. And it's really exciting. For the first time in 20 years, I'm not on Yagara and Turrbal country because we've moved from the middle of North Brisbane to the top of North Brisbane on the edge of the Moreton Bay Council. I'd like to acknowledge that we're all on unceded land, and the Aboriginal cultures and communities who've cared for country and cared for each other since time immemorial are worthy of our respect and acknowledgement. As you may know, AELA and our other groups work very closely with a number of Indigenous friends and colleagues. We're very proud to be in solidarity with folks and really want to welcome anyone on this call who might be from an Indigenous community or background. So over to us chatting. Marian Drew, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Lovely to be here. Lovely to see you and everybody else.
It's great to have you. And as we promote this series, we're trying to aim for a monthly or every 2 months conversation with people who not only are remarkable artists and thinkers and creators, but who are particularly inspired by nature. AELA is interested through many of our different aspects and programs, but we see human creativity and emotional connection and understanding of our belonging to places, that we think that's a really important reminder to focus on good governance and caring for country. So our arts program's deeply woven into the work we do. So Marian, would you like to share with us, I think the key questions I set, and I know you've got some lovely images to show us and I can't wait to see them. Really, we're inviting you to talk about your background, what brought you into the space of work that you do now, and of course, you know, which elements or what about nature has been inspiring you, our beautiful living world. So I'm going to leave it with Marian for a good 15, 20 minutes. She's going to show some lovely things to us, and then we'll come back and have a bit of a conversation and open it up to questions with any of you lovely folks in our audience who might want to ask questions. Thank you so much, Marian. Over to you.
Okay, well, I much rather speak with images, and I do have a few that I can share with everybody, and that might give a bit of a better picture of my evolution. Certainly, I'll finish off with some of my most recent work. So yeah, I'll answer some of those questions as we go, as we have some pictures.
Yeah, and just so you know, Marian, I collate the questions and I'll put them to you at the end. So you just talk and relax. Right. You don't have to worry about that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I've actually started off with one of our catalogue images in 2016. Was really the first major thing we did together with AELA, where Michelle and I convened this exhibition at the Brisbane Powerhouse, and it's called Plenty. And we pulled together a range of great artists, so you can see the list at the bottom. And, you know, it was incredibly diverse, and it was responsive to the Powerhouse site, which is an old, you know, electrical power station. But it, you know, we were trying to just draw attention to the range of people's artworks that were dealing and exploring and deeply thinking about, you know, these relationships that we have to the natural world and how important they are. And with my work, I started. I mean, I grew up, I know, on a cane plantation in central Queensland, and you know, being in the natural world was just, you know, very much a part of everyday life. so I brought that into my art practice when I started, really making art in my early 20s. And these were some of the first images I did. And it's always interesting to look back, because you always see those continuations of concern. So here I was trying to sort of marry, urban life with, the natural forms of tree trunks by projecting onto them and layering these two kinds of, histories, natural history and human history within the same frame. And I think that has that's pretty well consistent. That's all I do really is try to sort of work out, where do we fit into this big picture, of natural history. And that's taken me, I did this commission through the National Parks and Wildlife, and I was going to these great walks up the Queensland coast. And so the images I overlaid, these were drawings just using a torch, were referencing, boats and human habitation within these landscapes. But, they obviously very ephemeral, because they're just light paintings, which I then would photograph. So they didn't ever exist as you see them. They were a collected phenomena by the camera over time. And that's that really captured my concern for a long time about, and still does, about how the camera sees the world, and how it can capture a bit more of our interaction with that space through the controlled light. And so within these, landscapes, which, when I was working, I would use my body and time to, inscribe my presence into that landscape. So these lines are sort of the maximum height of my body that I could reach. So they were kind of marking out these figures, or even, and my gesture in that landscape. So there's that sort of invisibility of the figure, the invisibility of myself as the author of the work. And because I see, also that the pictures go on to have their own life, and in a sense, the author does become invisible once the artworks are made and leave you, really. So that concern and that background, growing up in the bush, and I was very aware, as we all were, of all the roadkill in Australia. And it was after I came back from a trip to Europe, and I'd been looking at these still lifes, that I then started making these works with Australian roadkill, and so bringing them into the home, laying them on our tables, and rephotographing them within a particular art history tradition, which is the still life. And I felt that by bringing them in and into these very, intimate and domestic scenes of the home, that it might create a closer connection, or a sort of a sense of familiarity and intimacy with those animals and their particular lives. I started off making, working with whole groups of animals, which were much more to create that link between, my contemporary practice in photography and this historic language of the still life in painting, which, we inherited from Europe, as we have inherited a lot of our ideas about how we think about the natural world. And so, images like that, for me, sized up, that sense of disregard for animal life, and or that its death, is a necessary consequence of our thriving and growth and progress and power. And I felt that the same content, really, that we still live by a lot of these ideas, that it's okay to waste, the natural world, so that we may thrive and, more than thrive, in a sense, overconsume. But I moved from working with groups of animals just to the singular animal, working so that to give that animal more presence and more respect, that particular life, you know, that is captured by the photograph. I mean, the animal was there, it did exist in front of the camera, and these works were, in a sense, sort of a document of that, but reconfigured to you know, situate them within this art historical lineage that frames our present day attitudes. Yeah, so I was working through, I worked with this for about a decade, and it became much more than me picking up roadkill. It became quite a community project. People would bring me animals. I would travel to different parts of Australia. This was in Tasmania, and so I created a fairly large archive of different types of animals that I then had to solve, you know, this sort of aesthetic problem of a way of representing them back to the public, so that they weren't you know, disgusted by the idea that it's a photograph of a dead animal, but they were seduced long enough to sort of maybe have a look at the animal and maybe think about some of those contexts that the animal had been put in. Working, you know, I mean, I've always tried to find myself in or put myself into natural environments. So I did some trips up to the Kimberley and North Queensland and Arnhem Land, and I really became awakened to the extraordinary nature of geology and, you know, rocks and caves, and I started photographing these things, not really knowing what I could do with them or how to translate this interest of mine into you know, my artwork. So I started coloring some of the caves and coloring the rocks to sort of draw them out again, or to turn them into something a little bit more abstract. I suppose I'm always looking for ways to hold a viewer's attention. You know, we live in an incredibly image-saturated world, and you know, artworks have to keep sort of reinventing and being refreshed so that we can capture audiences, you know, for a little longer against all of the, you know, all of the masses of images that are fighting for our attention. I suppose, you know, seeing the rocks have got extraordinary colors in them. So in a sense, these were, I was drawing out some of the colors that you could see in the rocks, but then photographs don't really capture. And we also become quite immune to, you know, photographs of landscapes because there are so many millions of them. Just Google sunset. And, you know, something so extraordinarily wonderful as a sunset becomes, you know, sort of banal and kitsch because of the sort of over reproduction of that in images. So these works I started to make quite large. I mean, they're related to, in a sense, kind of abstract paintings, and but they were made with, I would photograph, like this scene, I would make like 50 photographs of within that. So I was sort of mapping that scene to capture that detail and create a kind of a different perspective. It's not a one single perspectival view of that situation. It's kind of a little bit wrapped and warped because of these many photographs made to construct the one scene. And because I could do that, I had a very high resolution file, and I was very interested to make this very large. So this work was about 8 meters by 4 meters installed in somebody's house as a kind of a wallpaper, you know, in a kind of a man cave house, actually. Then I started to do a PhD, which I left my teaching of 30 years. I've been an art teacher in an art school at the Queensland College of Art for 30 years. And And when I left, I thought, well, this is a great opportunity to do some more study, or to actually think very deeply about my own work, my own archive, and about what I would do next. And so working with this love of and excitement that I drew from geology, which is just an extension of my fixation and concentration on the natural world, I started to sort of pull parallels between my own practice in the studio and some of the sort of key words that you would find when you start looking and thinking about the geological. And that was quite helpful in the ways that I could then work in the studio. It sort of started to push how I would think about my studio work in the light of these, this other world that is the sort of the deep time of geology. I mean, photography deals with time, and in such a fleetingly human way, severing things from sequences. And I felt a deep kind of a dissatisfaction with that sort of photographic representation of the world, not only because of its kind of mass reproductions and our everyday use of it, and that sort of feeling sort of overwhelmed with the number of images in our lives. So using those rocks that I had was photographing on those trips, this was like I would lift them photographically and then place them on the table. So this was pretty well a mountain up near Chiligo, and I would put a rock, a very large rock, or as heavy as I could lift, onto the table, and then photographically lock that other rock, the big rock that I'd collected on my travels, onto this table, still thinking about how, the tabletop or the some sort of domestic context can get us to think about those connections, so through the animals. And so I was using the same device here in terms of placing the rocks as a sort of a subject of a still life. The still life's kind of useful because everybody knows a still life. They know the history, they know, that it's an art form. So you've got this kind of safe context within which to talk to people about these ideas. And you could, by placing them on the table too, I hoped that people might see those sort of fleshy connections between these rocks, these Devonian rocks, which are all made from just, compressed life. And so much, the rock and life are so deeply interconnected. And I suppose I'm trying to make that point, seeing them as flesh. They were called Devonian flesh, swallowing the cave. So, to the point where, we carry the rocks that made us around inside us now as, skeletons and teeth, and, they keep firm the fleshy, worldly biologies. But they're quite surreal and, discordant too. They're sort of quite, that one's slightly blurry, I'm sorry. And then, so back into the studio, this is like taking the rocks back into the studio. I'm starting to tear up and interrogate the, photographic representation that frames all of these ideas that what we see about the world. Everything is kind of mediated through photography. And so I was tearing up these large photographs, or my historical photographs, and into these kind of rock forms that had by now deeply embedded them into my psyche. So everything I would make or tear sort of had this relationship to rocks. So part of this is this sort of breakdown of my my photographic work or even my thinking about photography, where it's starting to it's become a part of now my concerns, not so much just as a vehicle, but as a subject as well, because I fear that, you know, our whole experience of the natural world is mediated through this photographic language, of which we don't think very much about. And so this last exhibition of mine, and I'm including people in these, and I hope I don't offend anybody if they see themselves in a picture, to get scale and to also talk about that relationship of looking, and I'm using the body to you know, think about photography from a sort of a more embodied point of view. So the scale, these are it was a small gallery and a small group of works, some of which were sort of leaning and slipping and onto the floor, so that there's this very familiar image that is the out of focus photograph, which is a little bit reminiscent of a sort of an uploading photograph on your screen while you're waiting it to resolve itself, but it never does. So there's a great familiarity there in these diffuse images that, but they also are bent and hard and, you know, life size and sort of engage the physical, I hope, by, you know, if you have to turn your head, you have to move from one end to the other to actually see the two sides, etc. So there's this work, even though it's the subject matter is these like sharp rocks in a sense, or this diffuse distance. It's also very much about thinking about the viewer and the audience and what they bring to that experience of the artwork. And very, very happy to share authorship with audiences in terms of the content. I think I like the idea that the works change, you know, with different light on them, with different arrangements in relation to different objects, to what people are feeling, and, you know, and will affect how they see things. So they're very malleable, and I hope, you know, they can go off and continue to evolve. So you can see that I'm just trying to draw a sort of a sharp attention to some of these, to the subject matter that's recognizable, which are these rocks. And the same thing, most of these rocks are very, very large. They have, you know, lots and lots of details in them that you can then study on up closer and start to even recognize some of the geologies that have made them. So that, in summary, I suppose the work's really about the idea of, you know, it's about not taking for granted the photographic medium that delivers us content about the world, and but also about the deep time, or, you know, the otherworldliness of, you know, outside of the anthropocentric kind of view of the world, of that is, you know, the time of the earth, and that inseparability of, you know, the geological to the biological. Yeah, so I just finishing on some of these with the idea that people have to, you know, spend time with them and move across them. And that's all my very short talk will be, and we can have discussions. And
yes, absolutely. Thank you, Marian. If you could keep sharing screen, that would be great. I have a couple of questions about some of the photos you've shown. And excuse me, we're a small group, which is great. So if anyone has any questions for Marian, if you're shy, feel free to put them in the chat. That's what we normally do with a larger group. But if you'd like to push the little button and show you've got your hand raised, then I can coordinate any actual questions to Marian. Marian, are you able to scoot back to the roadkill photos, perhaps to the beginning of them? I think that was when you and I when we first met, I think you were still working on those collections.
Yeah.
and we'll go back before that too in a moment, but I was just wondering, what were some of the responses of people to the photographs? You said you were concerned about people, you know, going, "Ugh, it's a dead animal," but I'm always interested in what kind of feedback artists get at exhibitions, responses to your work.
That's right, me too. Well, when I first showed them, there were some icky reactions when people realized that they were dead and they weren't stuffed, because we're quite accustomed to seeing stuffed animals.
Yeah.
As if that's somehow as if they're somehow in their animation, you know, that's a less abject kind of a experience, you know. So yeah, people were a little concerned with that, or just the idea of looking at death, I think, was a real problem for people, because you know, we just don't allow any kind of death into our lives, you know, and that was part of the problem with the roadkill, was that the ability for people to completely ignore, myself included. You know, I'd spent the first 20 years of my life driving past, and you know, you just accept it as a part of what was normal. So now I started to think, you know, really, when you start thinking about it, you know, that they died as a consequence of our sort of driving and our urban expansion. And I felt that it was important to at least, you know, to acknowledge their death, and to, you know, and to think about, was it okay? And, you know, just to think about death in general, really. I mean, any sort of, this whole history of the still life does talk about our own mortality, you know, in that we can't take anything with us. There's a whole sort of strain of still life that talks about, you know, the vanity of human life. You know, that we're all in the end, we're all the same. But that sort of idea of consumption, you know, that analogy to consumption, you know, that, you know, by, you know, obviously they're sort of there in this context to talk about tables and eating and sharing food, and then, you know, so there's this sort of idea of consumption, which then you can sort of take a little bit further to sort of say that, you know, our gross consumption has this effect of killing off the wildlife.
And I as an Australian, when I first saw the works, I was struck by how, could you go back to the brush-tailed possum one, Marian? Oh, obviously the wombat, I can barely look at it. This possum one, I remember seeing it and being really struck by how complacent I had become to seeing European animals in still life. It could be a duck or a dead duck. That's food. But then when I was seeing Australian native animals, being quite not offended by the artwork, but remembering going, oh goodness, poor old possum, you know, like there was a genuine response as an Australian to the barbarism of having native animals on the table, which is a really weird feeling, given I have full respect for bush food. And well, that's right. I was tempted to sort of, you know, eat them afterwards, but I'm certainly not in my comments suggesting that you should have. Could have, no judgment from me. No, it was very interesting. And I was just going to ask, oh good, there's some comments coming in. I was about to ask a question, but that can wait. So let's see. Anita has said, I found the Roadkill series really interesting, especially the evolution in styling and subject from those that mirrored the painted still life of the possum to the less familiar, the split watermelon and the wombat. My question is, what you felt in looking at the image and being satisfied with it?
Well, I've felt a lot of things working with the animals, but looking at the image, I was focused on like the aesthetic tools to resolve an aesthetic problem. So, you know, color, weight, counterbalance, you know, all those kinds of things that we think about, you know, if you're constructing a picture, I had to draw on to be able, I think, to be able to present this work to people that would hold their attention for a while. So, you know, I became very conscious of beauty as a sort of as an end point. I wanted to, you know, make a beautiful picture to carry unbeautiful ideas, you know, or uncomfortable ideas. Does that answer that question? I'm not sure if it does.
I'm not hearing anything else except my dog barking occasionally. So yes, I think it did, Marian. And my apologies, folks, if you hear a yipping, it's my young red heeler trying to be part of the conversation, and he's in another room, so I can't run and tell him to shush. Jean has said, thank you, Drew, Marian. Wonderful and evocative art. Wondering if people have let you know if your art has changed their perceptions, attitudes, affected their behaviours. This is actually a big question for the art world, isn't it? Particularly in the nature of art. Would love to hear your thoughts on this, Marian.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this. I feel that I don't feel that any one individual can really make much change. I feel like it was felt quite liberating to realize that, you know, that you were part of a big field of people, you know, not a lineage, but, you know, it's a sort of a networked web of change, you know. So if I'm doing this and somebody else is doing that, then together, I think there is an impact. You know, you can sort of see there's a zeitgeist of ideas that get strength, but it's very much in with unity. I think that any changes do occur. I do think that you know, to change ideas, it's a, you know, culture has a lot to play in terms of changing people's ideas. And initially, and I do think that art is a very safe space within which to have those conversations or to present difficult ideas. We kind of assume that that's, you know, that it's okay to have those conversations within that space, but then we go away and then we think about it. I mean, with the still life work, a lot of people, that idea that it became a much more of a community-based project, you know, in that once the first exhibition, you know, that people started to get on board and sort of, you know, almost share in the construction of these works. And I did feel, and there some of the feedback was that it certainly made people more alert to the roadkill and what the species were. And, you know, it was that we'd taken it from this art context and then you see it back out in the world, which that's how I think art operates, is that sort of replication of something you see in art and then you see it in the world. It raises your attention. You just have a more heightened awareness of things. And I think that idea of art gets people to think, you know, have an emotional reaction, and then there's this kind of slow digestion of ideas. So I think art has a very strong role to play, but one individual, no. I do think we have to be together.
Thanks, Marian. If it's okay with you, could we go back to some of your first photos in this presentation with the little boats? It's actually some technical questions about these remarkable photos. Did you want to talk for a moment about how the heck you did them?
Well, I would just open these cameras. I'm using film cameras, and with this one, for example, I had two same sized large format film cameras open. So you just open up the lens. It's dark, and so within that dark space, you've got a long time for exposure. So I this might be 10, 15, 20-minute exposure by the time I moved right across the landscape, and going in and out of the water, thinking about what the camera's seeing, what from its point of view, and then drawing these things back to the camera. So the lines that I make are only a few seconds, But then it's sort of like wading through and moving on to the next spot and then
What did you make
and
the
then I
light
go
with? Is it a torch?
yeah, just torches. And so the backgrounds and foreground would be from a very large torch,
Right.
sort of like a painter might use different paint brush sizes. I have a sort of palette of torch
Torches.
sizes.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So you put some really big ones down on the ground to illuminate some aspects and keep other aspects dark, and then you tootle about doing the light show and the
Well,
light.
no, I sort of do everything sequentially. So I'll do the light show, and then I will move back into the same places where I was lighting up, you know, the trees and the sand. So all the sand and everything is me moving along the beach with the big torch. So it's quite, there's a lot of movement going on.
Yeah,
in front of the camera.
And can we have a look at the one in the water? Sorry, the next, I think it's that, of course, is beautiful too. Not that one. I'm thinking of the boat that looks very deep in the water or on top of the water. Perhaps it wasn't. I was just wondering how you did that.
No, the water's not very deep. You can see that the reeds are there. This is
Yeah.
Blue Lagoon or Blue Lake on Moreton Island. One of these very shallow, freshwater, exquisite
Yeah.
kind of landscapes.
Just beautiful. And the reflections of your self-created torchlight in the water.
Yeah, that's right. And the agitation in the water is my movement. So that's sort of the only clue, you know, because if you just drew the light, you know, it would kind of have this perfect reflection, but the agitated water is from my walking along and through the water.
Lovely.
And so that I would draw that, trying to remember where I started, and it was kind of a miracle that I did meet that spot. And then I go and sit outside, maybe light up a bit of the grass, and then wait for the ambient light. You know, it was quite dark, but, you know, and leaving it for 15, 20 minutes, and then the camera just collects the light and it turns it back a bit more towards daytime.
I love it. And I love the idea of you tiptoeing or stomping about in the water and the sand and basically having a good time in nature.
Dingoes and everything. I often work alone, and it's a little bit, you know, it's a strange space in that darkness with a torch in these quite remote, some of them are quite remote landscapes, and just the sounds. You know, it's like going into another world, really. You know, and you feel like a bit of an explorer, sort of like trying to find your way with
in
a
the
torch.
Dark. That's wonderful.
In the dark.
We have two lovely comments. We have one here. It's very interesting to know about the analogy between geology and the studio perspective. What needs to be done to achieve that?
Oh, well, I don't use it as I'm not trying to sort of, that's not so much the content of the work. So I'm not sort of trying to, there's no sort of measure of whether it's been achieved or not. The geology is a mechanism, sort of a way of opening out, you know, what my normal modes of thinking might be. And so, for example, when I was working in the studio, and I was, you know, I had these experiences with sort of climbing over rocks, I've really, you know, you really start to think about balance in it, you know, or I wanted to make images about balance. I liked the way things would, you know, there was this sort of, things would slip down. I don't know, I just would see things in my own studio practice which I felt were analogous to, you know, what was happening, or to what I'd seen rocks do. So it was not, yeah, it's like a key for me to rethink things in a much broader way, which is why I have to think about the nature of photography, because, you know, it's a sort of a mapping, you know, it's a human sort of mapping device of the way, you know, to represent the three-dimensional world on 2 dimensions. But, you know, we lose so much And, I do think that seeing or thinking something about the nature of the measuring tool is important in terms of understanding what it is that you're seeing. So it's like, if people look at these pictures, it's great if they understand a bit more about how it was made, because then they see more. And I think that's the same, if people think a bit more about photography, about its history, it's based on sort of, 20th century science, or, this and a kind of a mathematical way of mapping and single point perspective of the human-centered eye, it helps be a little bit more critical, about what they're seeing as photographs.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Marian. A comment and question from Sue. She says, I love the contradictions, the beautiful materials and crockery and the artwork sitting alongside death and destruction, far removed from nature. Can I ask, was there a particular incident or image that provoked this line of thought? And I'm wondering, Sue, if the question relates particularly to the Roadkill series. Let us know if it's not, but that's what I would assume. Yeah,
I'll just move along then. I suppose for starters, I think I don't see nature as separate. So I think my point is that it's not something out there that's, in the bush flying around, or, living in these separate lives. I want, we are situated in them and they are in us. So I suppose, there's that idea, and then the contrast of the plates is, I use well-used plates, old op shop plates, things that have got sort of marks and patina of life in them, which talk about use, I suppose, our sort of historical, relationship to bowls and plates and feeding ourselves, and how closely connected that is to, other animals' lives.
Sue said, thank you. She loves that answer.
Thank you.
And Anita has said that this Still Life series will really be something I reflect on. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
What have we got? Where the animals appear as food. By contrast, your work is about the abundance of roadkill without the sense of dining. Is there a use versus waste reflection in there? I would have thought so.
I think, I think there's use and reflection and waste. I do think that that animals dying beside the road is seen as a kind of waste. They're sort of lying alongside the waste that we throw out of our windows. I kind of feel that people reconcile those deaths with the idea that, that the animals' lives are wasted, so that we may drive our cars, or we may, sprawl our urban, lives out and encroach upon their diminishing habitats. So there was waste and what was the other one?
Hold on, please hold. Is there a use versus waste reflection?
No, not so much a use. Apart from, that I'm setting up a table that functions as useful to us. They hint at these spaces that we know very well, which are, our daily or of daily use. Yeah, and that was just a device to draw these lives more intimately together.
Thanks, Marian. In a moment, I'm going to share screen and reflect on some of the art exhibitions we've done together under the Earth Arts program, and just share a few comments and observations about some of the work we've done together and why AELA is so interested in this space. But just as I start to set up that screen, Marian, one question I have for you is, I know for a fact you're a very gifted drawer and artist. You obviously have chosen photography as one of the dominant forms of your art practice. What is it about photography that you prefer than to drawing, or that keeps you in that space?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I started out with photography from sort of practical reasons. You know, I came from a working class, no artists or, you know, in my background. And so I thought maybe I should do photography as it would be a skill that I could maybe get a job with later. So that
that sounds like a Central Queensland kind of thing.
Yeah,
that's what I did too.
My choice, but at 20, you know. But then I realized, and I was bouncing. I was sort of majoring in drawing and photography, and then and I thought, oh, I'll go and do drawing because, you know, that's my first love. And but, you know, then the photography people said, no, stay in photography, do your drawing in photography.
Right.
So, and that was kind of a key. Then I could, you know, I tried to, you know, my desire to make marks, my desire to express a sort of a very subjective interpretation of my experiences of the world, and, you know, and find out what I thought about things. I pushed that into photography, which then gave me quite a unique position in photography, and it then, you know, gave me a whole career in photography.
That's wonderful. And of course, within an arts practice, there's no either or. Some people do choose just one thing.
And I still draw, obviously.
Yeah.
I draw to think and to emphasize my ability to see, and to, you know, like if you ever do a drawing in a place, you always remember that place. It's, you know, whereas,
yes,
you know, photographs, like bang, 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 we don't even see because we are photographing. Yeah. So I definitely still use drawing as a way of helping me see and slow down and spend time.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, look, I'm not going to say thank you yet because we're not finished with you, Marian. This conversation about AELA Earth Arts is incomplete without you being part of that anyway. But what I did want to take time to do was share with people, particularly those who may not know about the Earth Arts program, and a little bit of its history. So the homepage, the absolutely beautiful website that James Lee he's on this call, but I think he might be quietly catching up on a few things while listening to our awesomeness. But the Earth Arts website is there, eartharts.org.au. And in really the history of it is, well, first, let me just show you. I might move it up so you can see some of last year's virtual gallery. Obviously, COVID pushed us online, and now even if in the future we start to regroup around some in-place real life exhibitions, the virtual gallery really is a lovely way to show people's work in a low cost, no cost kind of way to do that. I might just mention that today's Earth Arts program looks like the following. If I bring it down here, we've got what we loosely call our Earth Arts Collective, which is a number of artists who've been with AELA, some of which for many years, our whole life as an organisation. And every 2 years now, we've got 2 of these creative writing anthologies available. They're absolutely beautiful. Have a look at that. The storytelling aspect really came in with 2 young volunteers who initiated the Earthwords anthology. And visual arts have been a very strong part of the artists who've been kind enough to collaborate with us over the years. And 2 or 3 years ago, I won't even try to have a grip on the time-space continuum. We worked with a number of acoustic ecology people who use sound and art, and it's just been brilliant. And that brought us to one of our very dear friends, Andrew Skiok, who for decades has been recording birdsong and just a remarkable collection of the sounds of nature. And we host Andrew in webinars and activities in our work, but he's released a book and doing great things. So there's lots of things to explore on the website, and you will see the virtual gallery from 2020. And the only other thing I wanted to share, because I could talk for days about this, but I really just wanted a few minutes. So in addition to these sort of thematic, medium-based ways of looking at what we're doing, I just wanted to show you the time. Where are we going? The catalogues. Forgive me, the website's a little slow. Either that or it's me that's a little slow. So if I just scroll down without hurting your eyes. So the very first catalogue we created, look at that. The cover is one of Marian's beautiful, sad artworks. So we started calling our biennial arts activities or exhibition RONA, Rights of Nature Australia. But then Corona happened, the coronavirus, so we changed the name. In 2020, it became Voices of Nature, and we experiment. But if we scroll down a little longer, one of the coolest things is that back in 2011, which is when I hosted really what was AELA's first conference, but AELA didn't exist yet, a number of people came into our Earth jurisprudence space who were artists who were enthusing about Thomas Berry's work and really excited to connect with us. And one of them was Tess de Quincey from an amazing dance group. And so in June 2012, Tess hosted this remarkable wildlaw arts incubator that brought scientists and Indigenous community leaders and lawyers like myself together. And we were talking about a whole range of artworks that folks had been doing. And I guess I could say that I joke that I'm a recovering lawyer, as someone who learnt very formal Western legal education methods through law and history and politics. I'd actually been someone who had dabbled in creative writing and really bad drawing since I was about 1. My mother joked I was born with a pencil in my hand, which let's not reflect on that too much because that would be a very painful process. But I used to write creative stories all the time until I got to high school. And suddenly that left brain, right brain battle that goes on, my academic interests won over. And to this day, I have not yet finished any of the something like 12 novels I've tried to start. I have a collection of kids' stories that I have finished and done nothing with. But what I like to think, as someone who's a recovering lawyer and a failed attempted creative, is that I've mixed it all together. And I think that element of creativity and weird imagination, and the whole world is animated and alive, has definitely driven the work of AELA. And it's made me profoundly grateful to artists like Marian and many others in our collective who come and play with us, because to me, it's one of the delights of being a human being, is engaging in that need to burst forth with expression, whether it's the gift of the gab that I have, and I've claimed the Irish line of people that have enabled me to be a pretty good speaker when I want to be. And I just think one of the coolest things about being a human being is our imagination. I'm sure plants and animals have their own versions of that, but I think as a human being, we should be engaging with that creative and imaginative place much, much more often. And in our Western cultures, and I can speak with deep experience about what Western education does, it really desiccates the soul to the extent that it has made a lot of learning so uninteresting to younger people. So I lament that we have a system of education that doesn't make children enamored of learning, when in fact it should, because learning and engaging is the way that we get our input, and that output is often just that, I think, a remarkable, exquisite part of being human. That bizarre urge we have to just pull out a pencil and scribble something, to journal, to sketch a flower, no matter how badly it comes out on the other end. It was that, in my case, not speaking for any of you, it's the actual process of doing the scribble and doing a drawing. That's why I was really happy to hear you say that, Marian. Slowing down long enough to draw something, for some of us at least, it's not about the product you create. It's about the process of really joyfully engaging with those things and those relatives in nature that we're drawing. So I just wanted to share that I have always owed a debt of gratitude to Tess de Quincey for connecting AELA almost immediately in our story of being an organisation to the arts space. And then I met Marian, I guess it must have been I think it was maybe after that, in the September of 2012, when I was working for the Griffith Climate Change Response Program, and Brendan Mackey brought you and I together looking at arts projects, wasn't it?
Yeah. And then we did some student focused sort of intensive mode courses where you would come in and talk to them about that, and then we would go to different sites.
Yes.
Well, we'd be located on site for like a week, and they'd have to all make work about those ideas, and then we'd have an exhibition. And yeah, it led on to a number of exhibitions which were able to be used in a sense to celebrate or mark some of your conferences.
Yes. I'm just looking back at the Wild Law Art exhibition in 2013. That's really exciting. I think that was your and my first exhibition collaboration. I remember, and I'm not sure if it's going to come up. Yeah, it's funny. 10 years. It's 10 years working together, Marian.
Yeah.
Tally ho to us. It's been an absolute delight. And again, one of the reasons, there we go, I wanted to show people what AELA does. Unfortunately, we have no budget, no money. We're not renowned for our ability to find money. So the fact that we've been able to keep our community and discussions going, despite the fact that we have very little in terms of financial recompense to offer, but we try to create spaces to promote people's artworks and be, if at all, useful in stimulating that sort of multidisciplinary or cross-disciplinary way of thinking and doing. So oh yeah, look at that. That's fantastic. Anyway, Michelle's waxing lyrical about the past. I'll stop sharing, because if anyone's interested in our work, you're very, very welcome, obviously, to visit the website. And I really do want to acknowledge James Lee, who is being shy today, catching up on work behind his camera, which is totally fine. Hello, James. James maintains and responds to all of our crazy requests for the website. And those online exhibition spaces are very important when we either want to reduce our fossil fuel travel related carbon miles, or we're trapped indoors during COVID. So yes, the story of the AELA Earth Arts program is only a little bit of the way in, and we're looking forward to a lot more conversations. Last year, with our online gallery and our connection to the launch of the second anthology, etc., it's been really wonderful. So what we might try to do, Marian, is think about next year as a real life exhibition again around some core themes. I suspect it will be bioregionalism, because so much of our work looks at earth-centered governance, place-based earth-centered governance, and with many of our project activities, that's what we'll be excited about. So, but on that note, we're 1 minute or 2 minutes past 2. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. And Marian Drew, I know you're incredibly busy. You're about to go overseas and do amazing things. So I can't thank you enough for sharing with us. I always love looking at your artworks. It's a wonderful excuse to drag you out of your practice and let you talk about it to us. And also, if you are in Brisbane, folks, Marian's exhibition is open until the 27th. Is that right? At OneSpace?
Yeah, it's open. The last day is next Saturday.
Yeah, I really recommend, of course, that you go see it. And if we had a bit more time, I was going to engage you in conversation about those funky folded platforms that you've delivered the artwork on. It's absolutely delicious and mesmerizing. So yeah,
I'm just going to write up the address or the gallery.
Yes, please do. Thanks, folks. You're putting some lovely comments in there, thanking Ayla and thanking Marian. And thank you. Someone asked if there is a space for previous conversations. We've actually only just started the online webinar Yarning with Artists. So if you go to the events page on the Earth Arts website, either now or by next week, the recording of our chat with Renata Buziak and Maret Megarit will be up. And so this recording will be up too. And so every month, any of the conversations we have will be shared. And if you are a practicing artist and would like to connect with our very humble and non-financially driven Earth Arts Collective, please come and play with us. We'd love to promote your work and listen to your stories. So again, thank you, Marian. Yay.
Yay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for
everyone.
coming in.
Yeah. We'll see you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.